Japanese attack fleet consisting of 6 aircraft carriers, 2 battleships and hundreds of aircraft.
A remote island wiped from maps. A secret facility crafting lethal compounds. A past so chilling that even its workers didn't grasp the full horror. But just when history tried to bury Okunoshima's secrets, something unexpected happened. Decades after its dark past, Okunoshima became overrun by rabbits, baffling scientists. Were these rabbits remnants of government experiments? How did 8 lab rabbits spark a phenomenon that would shock the world 4 decades later? Hop in, let's find out. To understand how this bizarre twist unfolded, let's rewind to Okunoshima's quiet beginnings before World War II. Okunoshima, a quiet beginning. Before it became the famous Rabbit Island, Okunoshima was just another small island in the Seto Inland Sea of Japan. Located about 3 kilometers off the coast of Takahara, Hiroshima Prefecture, it was a peaceful fishing community with a small local population. Picture a tiny speck in Japan's Seto Inland Sea, just 800 meters wide, surrounded by shimmering waves and gentle breezes. This is Okunoshima, long before it earned its dark reputation as a poison gas factory. Rewind the clock to the centuries before World War II, and you'll find an island so peaceful it barely registers on history's radar. Welcome to Okunoshima's quiet beginning, a humble origin story that's about to take a wild turn. Let's set the scene. Before the 20th century, it wasn't much more than a sleepy patch of land, roughly 4.3 square kilometers, small enough to walk end to end in under an hour. Historical records are sparse, but we know it was home to just 3 fishing families, likely numbering fewer than 20 people. These folks lived simply, tending small plots of cultivated land and casting nets into the sea for their daily catch. The island's name, Okunoshima, translates roughly to Big Back Island, a nod to its modest silhouette against the horizon, a quiet, unassuming dot amid Japan's bustling archipelago. Life here was tranquil, almost timeless. The island's natural beauty, lush vegetation, rocky shores, and a mild climate made it a postcard-perfect slice of rural Japan. There were no grand temples or bustling ports, just the rhythm of the tides and the chatter of seabirds. But Okunoshima's isolation and strategic spot in the inland sea, a vital maritime route, meant it wouldn't stay overlooked forever. The first ripple of change came during the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905, when Japan's military ambitions began to stir. In 1904, as Japan clashed with Russia over control of Manchuria and Korea, the Imperial Navy eyed the inland sea's choke points. Okunoshima, perfectly positioned between Honshu and Shikoku, caught their attention. By 1905, the military had transformed this peaceful outpost into a defensive stronghold, constructing 10 forts armed with cannons to guard the shipping lanes. These sturdy stone and concrete batteries, some still standing today, were built to fend off Russian warships that never came. It was a brief but significant militarization, completed in just a year, turning the island into a guardian of Japan's growing naval power. The forts weren't glamorous, think low, squat structures blending into the hills, but they marked Okunoshima's first taste of a purpose beyond fishing and farming. Once the war ended in September 1905 with Japan's victory, the island slipped back into obscurity. The forts sat idle, their cannons rusting under the sea spray, and the fishermen resumed their quiet lives. For the next 2 decades, Okunoshima faded from the spotlight, its brief military stint a footnote in a nation focused on modernization elsewhere. The population stayed tiny, the land stayed green, and the rabbits? Well, they weren't here yet. That's a story for later. But this serene chapter was just the calm before the storm. By the 1920s, Japan's military machine was revving up again, and Okunoshima's isolation would soon make it the perfect hiding spot for something far shadier than forts. Stick around, because this sleepy island is about to become a secret no one could have predicted. Okunoshima. During World War II, the secret chemical weapons factory. Fast forward to the 1920s, and Okunoshima's quiet days are about to end in a cloud of poison. Japan, riding high from its Russo-Japanese war victory, was flexing its military muscle, and chemical weapons were the next frontier. In 1925, the world signed the Geneva Protocol, banning poison gas in war. But Japan had other plans. Behind closed doors, the Imperial Japanese Army launched a secret program, and by 1927, they zeroed in on Okunoshima as their hidden lab. Why this tiny island? It was perfect, 800 meters wide, tucked in the Sato Inland Sea, far from prying eyes in Tokyo, and already dotted with those old forts from 1905. Isolation was key, and Okunoshima had it in spades. The decision wasn't random. Japan's military brass needed a spot where literal or figurative leaks wouldn't reach the mainland. Okunoshima's remoteness, surrounded by water near Hiroshima Prefecture, made it a natural fortress. Plus, its small size, just 4.3 square kilometers, meant total control. In 1927, the army quietly began plotting, and by May 1929, construction kicked off. The island was wiped from official maps. Poof, gone, to keep it hush-hush. Civilians were evicted, those 3 fishing families sent packing, and the stage was set for something diabolical. The goal? Produce chemical weapons banned by international law, all under a veil of secrecy that would last decades. This wasn't Japan's first dabble in poison gas. They'd toyed with tear gas in the 1910s. But Okunoshima was a game-changer. The army tapped the Osaka artillery arsenal and roped in private firms like Nihon Seisan to build a state-of-the-art facility. Early production focused on tear gas and mustard gas, nasty stuff that burns skin and lungs. Workers, often locals from Takehara, were kept in the dark about the full scope, told only they were making chemicals. Meanwhile, the island's natural beauty masked a growing horror. By 1929, Okunoshima wasn't just a dot in the sea, it was Japan's dirty little secret, ready to churn out death on an industrial scale. Construction and production. By May 1929, Okunoshima was buzzing, not with fishers, but with construction crews turning it into a poison gas factory. Over the next 16 years, until Japan's surrender in 1945, this island became a chemical weapons powerhouse. The setup was massive. Factories, storage tanks, power plants, and labs sprawled across its tiny frame. Workers built concrete bunkers and steel vats to brew over 6,000 tons of gas. Some estimates say 9,000, enough to make your eyes water just thinking about it. They started with mustard gas, a blistering yellow brew, then added phosgene, which chokes you from the inside, and lewisite, a skin-melting nightmare. This wasn't a small operation. It was a full-on war machine. The workforce was a mix of locals and conscripts, peaking at 6,000 during the war. Many didn't know the truth. Recruited with vague promises of factory jobs, they handled lethal chemicals without proper gear. Safety? Barely a thought. Workers suffered burns, lung damage, even death, with survivors later reporting scars that never faded. To test the gas, they used hundreds of rabbits kept in cages, exposed to see how fast they'd die. It was harsh, efficient, and chillingly scientific. By 1937, production hit its stride, supplying Japan's campaigns in China, where gas attacks became a brutal reality. Secrecy was everything. Okunoshima stayed off maps, its ferries guarded, its purpose cloaked. The army ran a tight ship, literally, ferrying workers from Tadanumi under strict orders. No talking, no questions. The island's output was staggering. Mustard gas alone filled thousands of shells and bombs, shipped out under cover of night. By 1945, it had produced enough to poison entire battlefields, a silent killer born from a sleepy island. But as the war turned against Japan, cracks appeared. Allied intel sniffed out rumors, and the end was near. Okunoshima's dark reign was about to collapse, but not before leaving a legacy etched in stone and scars. War's End. August 1945. Japan surrenders, and Okunoshima's poison gas empire crumbles. The war is over, But the island's a ticking time bomb. Tons of chemicals, ruined factories, and a gloomy history no one wants to touch. Enter the Allied occupation forces, led by the US. They storm in, determined to dismantle this secret weapon lab. What they find is staggering. Bunkers stuffed with mustard gas canisters, vats of phosgene, and a wasteland of rusting machinery. Their orders are clear: destroy it all. So, they get to work, torching what they can and burying the rest in unmarked pits across the island. The cleanup was brutal and fast. Allied troops burned stockpiles in open pits, sending toxic plumes skyward. Some estimate 1,500 tons incinerated on site. What they can't burn, they dump into the sea or seal underground, hoping it stays buried. The rabbit test subjects, around 200 of them, don't make it either. They're euthanized to erase evidence, their cages torched with the rest. By late 1945, the factories are rubble, the workers sent home, and Okunoshima's a ghost town. The US keeps it classified, but whispers of poison gas linger. Japan won't admit the full scope for decades. Post-war, the island's a mess. Ruins dot the landscape. Crumbling power plants, shattered storage sheds, and those creepy forts from 1905, now silent witnesses to a darker era. The soil's tainted, the water's suspect, but the Allies call it done and pull out. Japan's left to reckon with Okunoshima's scars, workers with lifelong health issues, a hidden death toll, and an island no one knows what to do with. It sits abandoned, a toxic relic, until the 1960s when it starts to shift. But that's for later. For now, in 1945, Okunoshima's story pauses. Its poison gas days are over, its rabbit chapter yet to begin. Okunoshima. After World War II. As the echoes of World War II faded in August 1945, Okunoshima stood silent, a scarred shell of its former self. The poison gas factories were gone, reduced to rubble by Allied torches and bombs, and the once bustling island was left to rot. For nearly 2 decades, it sat in limbo, a toxic ghost town whispered about, but rarely visited. But Okunoshima's story doesn't end in ruin. From the ashes of its dark past, it slowly morphed into something new, something peaceful, even hopeful. Let's explore how this secret island traded poison for peace and set the stage for its fluffy future. In the immediate post-war years, from 1945 to the early 1960s, Okunoshima was a no-man's land. Japan's government avoided the topic, leaving survivors to suffer without aid. It wasn't until the 1980s that the truth trickled out, spurred by aging workers demanding compensation. In 1986, the Ministry of Health finally stepped up, offering medical support to 6,500 registered victims, acknowledgement, at last, of Okunoshima's harsh toll. But even as the scars lingered, a shift was brewing. The island's isolation, once its strength, now made it a candidate for something gentler, a place to heal rather than harm. That shift kicked into gear in 1963, when Okunoshima was folded into the Setonaikai National Park, a sprawling network of islands celebrating Japan's natural beauty. The government saw potential, not in war, but in tourism. The island's beaches, trails, and ruins offered a unique draw, though the poison gas legacy loomed large. Then, in 1988, a game-changer arrived. The Okunoshima Poison Gas Museum opened its doors. This small, 2-room building, funded partly by Takahara locals, laid bare the island's history. Photos of blistered workers, gas masks, and a 1929 factory map told the story Japan had buried. It wasn't a cover-up anymore. It was education, drawing 17,000 visitors yearly by the 1990s to reflect on war's cost. With the museum came a new identity. Okunoshima wasn't just a relic of destruction. It was a place of peace, a quiet retreat in the inland sea. The old forts and factory ruins became photo ops, the beaches lured campers, and the Kukamura National Park Resort Hotel, built in 1971, added hot springs to the mix. The island's dark past didn't vanish. Chemical traces still taint the soil, but it faded under a fresh coat of green, And then, something unexpected hopped into the picture: rabbits. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, whispers of these furry newcomers began, hinting at a bizarre twist no one saw coming. Okunoshima was shedding its poison gas shroud, trading it for a softer, stranger legacy, one that had shocked Japan 40 years later. The rabbits arrive. Theories of their origins. Now we've reached the heart of Okunoshima's wild tale: the rabbits. Today, this tiny island swarms with over 1,000 floppy-eared residents, hopping fearlessly toward tourists for a carrot or a cuddle. But how did they get here? From a dark past of poison gas to a present overrun by bunnies, the leap feels almost unbelievable. Let's dig into the official story and peel back the layers of myths and theories swirling around these furry invaders. Spoiler: it all starts with just 8 little rabbits, and a whole lot of speculation. First up, the most accepted explanation, straight from the history books. In 1971, Okunoshima was shaking off its wartime shadow, newly minted as part of Setonaikai National Park. Enter Hirofumi Nishiyoshi, the first manager of the Kukamura National Park Resort Hotel, which opened that year. Nishiyoshi had a vision: make the island a family-friendly hotspot. So, he invited a group of school children from Takahara to join him in a quirky publicity stunt. On a sunny day in 1971, exact date lost to time, they released 8 domestic rabbits onto the island. These weren't wild hares, they were European rabbits, Oryctolagus cuniculus, the kind you'd find in a pet shop, cute, tame, and fluffy. This story checks out. Sources like Get Hiroshima and Japan Airlines travel guides peg 1971 as the kickoff, with Nishiyoshi's stunt aimed at drawing tourists. 8 rabbits, 4 does, 4 bucks, were set loose with no predators to stop them. The island's isolation meant no foxes, no cats, just free rein to hop and multiply. It was a simple plan: a handful of bunnies to soften Okunoshima's stern image. Little did Nishiyoshi know, those 8 would spark a population boom that had turned the island into Usagi-jima, Rabbit Island, by the 21st century. This is the official line, backed by park records and locals, but it's not the only story floating around. Let's hop into the wilder theories. One of the juiciest myths claims today's rabbits are descendants of the World War II test subjects, survivors of the poison gas experiments. Picture this: hundreds of rabbits, caged in Okunoshima's labs, breathing mustard gas to test its lethality. The war ends, the Allies sweep in, and somehow, a few escape the cleanup, scampering into the wild to breed like, well, rabbits. It's a gripping tale, chemical survivors rising from the ashes, and it's fueled the island's mystique for years, popping up on sites like Ranker and even some tourist blogs. But here's the reality check. During the war, around 200 rabbits were used, per Smithsonian and National Geographic reports. They weren't pets, they were lab tools, exposed to lethal doses and dissected for data. When Japan surrendered in 1945, the US occupation forces didn't mess around. They euthanized every last one, burning their remains with the factory rubble. Plus, those were likely specialized breeds, not the European stock we see today. The timeline doesn't match either. 26 years from 1945 to 1971 with no rabbit sightings? This theory's a bust, but it's easy to see why it stuck around. It's dark, dramatic, and ties the rabbits to Okunoshima's past. Released post-war warning system. Next up, a theory with a sci-fi twist. Rabbits as a post-war poison detector. The idea goes like this. After 1945, with chemical traces lingering in the soil and water, someone, maybe the government, maybe locals, released rabbits to act as a living alarm. If they started dying off, it'd signal toxic hotspots. It's a creepy concept, furry canaries in a coal mine, suggesting Okunoshima stayed dangerous long after the factories shut down. This one is intriguing but flimsy. There's no evidence of a formal cleanup or monitoring program post-war. Allied forces burned and buried the gas, then left. National Geographic notes no significant decontamination happened, and the island sat abandoned until the 1960s. Why rabbits? Why not lab tests? And if they were warning signals, why'd they thrive instead of croak? By the 1970s, when rabbit numbers spiked, no one reported mass die-offs. Quite the opposite. This theory leans on the island's toxic reputation, but lacks dates, names, or documents. It's a cool story, just not a true one. Then there's the oddball tale of the British couple. This one is vague but persistent, sometime post-war. Dates vary from the 1950s to 1970s. A British pair vacationing in Japan supposedly abandoned their pet rabbits on Okunoshima. Maybe they worked at the hotel. Maybe they were tourists who couldn't take their pets home. The rabbits hopped free, and boom, population explosion. It's a charming tale, but it's folklore at best. No records name this couple, no ship logs, no hotel guest books, nothing. Ranker and Reddit threads toss it around, but it's light on specifics. Compared to the 1971 release, with Nishiyoshi's documented stunt, this feels like a campfire story. Fun to tell, hard to prove. Did foreigners visit Okunoshima? Sure, as tourists later on, but abandoning pets en masse? Unlikely. It's a quirky footnote, not a foundation. So, where does that leave us? The 71 release holds water. 8 European rabbits, let loose by Nishiyoshi and the kids, kicking off a furry dynasty. The test subject escape? Debunked by history. The warning system? No proof. The British couple? A cute guess with no legs. Japan's national park records and eyewitness accounts back the official story. Those 8 bunnies were the spark. But how did they go from 8 to thousands in just 40 years? That's the next chapter, and trust me, it's a wild ride of survival, evolution, and a little tourist magic. Evolution and survival, 40 years later. So, 8 rabbits hit Okunoshima in 1971, cute, fluffy, and clueless about the wild ride ahead. Fast forward 40 years to 2011, and Japan's jaw drops. The island's overrun with hundreds, maybe thousands of bunnies, hopping everywhere like they own the place. How did a handful of pet rabbits turn this former poison gas hub into Rabbit Island? And how have they thrived for over 5 decades despite a rocky start? Let's dive into their population explosion, their surprising adaptations, and their survival story up to 2025. Picture this. It's 1971, and those 8 European rabbits, 4 does, 4 bucks, are set loose by Hirofumi Nishiyoshi and a gaggle of school kids. These aren't scrappy wild hares. They're domesticated Oryctolagus cuniculus, bred for cages and cuddles. Okunoshima's a dream for them. No predators like foxes or hawks, no dogs or cats, just open fields and a mild climate. Rabbits breed fast. Gestation is 31 days. Rabbits litter up to 12. So by 1972, those 8 could have ballooned to dozens. By the 1980s, visitors noticed more bunnies hopping around, but the real boom hit later. By 2007, National Geographic pegged the population at 300, a 37-fold jump in 36 years. Tourists started flocking to Kukamura Hotel, tossing carrots and cabbage, fueling the growth. With no natural checks, the numbers soared. By 2013, estimates ranged from 700 to 1,000 per Smithsonian reports. Exact counts are tricky with rabbits darting into bushes. That's 40 years from 8 to 1,000, a shock that turned Okunoshima into a global sensation. With the advent of the internet, videos went viral, fluffy swarms mobbing tourists. Feeding bans were ignored, visitors couldn't resist, and the rabbits thrived, their numbers exploding thanks to this human buffet. These rabbits didn't just multiply, they adapted. Starting as pampered pets, they went feral, but with a twist, they stayed tame. Unlike wild rabbits digging burrows and fleeing humans, Okunoshima's bunnies evolved a bold streak, hopping right up to strangers, paws out for snacks. It's a survival hack. Tourists became their grocery store. Their diet shifted too. In captivity, they'd munch hay and pellets, living 8 to 10 years. Here, it's tourist veggies, carrots, lettuce, cabbage, plus patchy island grass and shrubs. It's not ideal, but it works, though their lifespans drop to about 2 years due to exposure and inconsistent food. Physically, they've changed little, still white, brown, or black with floppy ears. But behaviorally, they're islanders now. They don't burrow much. The rocky soil and old ruins aren't burrow-friendly, so they shelter under bushes or concrete slabs. They've learned to dodge the rare threats, ferry traffic or rough kids, but their tame roots keep them trusting. Life's not all carrots and cuddles, though. The island's past poses challenges. Chemical residues linger in the soil and groundwater from the 1945 cleanup. No major decontamination happened, per National Geographic, so traces of mustard gas and lewisite could still lurk. Studies are sparse, but some rabbits show health quirks, eye infections, respiratory issues, possibly tied to toxins, though tourist overfeeding of sugary veggies might share blame. Predators are gone, but human hazards aren't. Cars on ferries clip a few yearly, and rough handling causes injuries like broken limbs or stress deaths. Overpopulation's another hurdle. By 2018, vegetation was thinning. 1,000 rabbits munching sparse grass strained the ecosystem. Starvation loomed in lean seasons, and competition sparked scuffles. Their short lifespan, 2 years versus 10 in captivity, reflects the grind. Exposure to rain, heat, and cold, plus spotty nutrition, takes a toll. Yet, they persist, showing resilience. Non-profits like Rabbit Island Japan stepped in by 2015, offering vet care and pushing feeding rules, pellets over carrots, to ease the strain. Okunoshima in the present day. Jump to 2025, and Okunoshima's rabbit kingdom endures, likely still 1,000 plus, though no official census exists post-2018's 1,000 estimate. They're a tourist magnet, drawing 100,000 visitors yearly pre-COVID, rebounding strong now. Ferries from Tadanumi unload folks armed with rabbit food. Pellets are encouraged, but carrots still sneak in. The bunnies swarm docks, fearless and fluffy, a living welcome mat. Conservation's ramped up, signs warn against picking them up, and local groups monitor health, spaying a few to curb growth, though mass sterilization is off the table to keep the wild charm. They've evolved into symbols of renewal. The island's greenery is rebounding with volunteer planting, balancing their grazing. Their survival is a marvel. Born from 8 pets, they've outlasted poison gas scars, tourist chaos, and nature's limits. Geneticists suggest they're still European stock, not wild hybrids, per a 2016 study from Japan Times, but their grit is uniquely Okunoshima bred. They're shorter-lived, scrappier, and bolder than their ancestors. Getting here's a cakewalk. Ferries zip from Tadanumi, a 15-minute ride across sparkling waters, dropping you at a dock where rabbits swarm like a welcoming committee. No cars clog the island, just 4.3 square kilometers of trails, beaches, and greenery, part of Sitanaikai National Park since 1963. The Kukamura Resort Hotel, built since 1971, offers hot springs and cozy rooms, while campgrounds lure adventurers. Walk the trails, and you'll stumble on history's ghosts. The Poison Gas Museum, opened in 1988, pulls no punches with its stark exhibits, gas masks, worker photos, and a 1929 factory map. Nearby, the old forts from 1905 loom, moss-covered and silent, while factory ruins, shattered bunkers, and rusted pipes dot the landscape. No major cleanup erased the chemical traces. Signs warn against digging, a nod to the mustard gas buried in 1945. It's a sobering contrast to the rabbits nibbling at your feet, a living lesson in war's cost, drawing 17,000 museum-goers annually to reflect, not just snap selfies. Visitors leave with bunny pics and history lessons, a blend of Japan's mastered. Acknowledge the dark, embrace the light. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.